Kyle, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. Would love to hear, so many different parts of your story, probably relevant for our audience, but also just interesting facets. Would love to hear, in a nutshell, kind of your story into finance, how you got started, and, we'll take it from there.
Yeah, definitely. Mitchell, we were chatting before we hopped on record here about Mises and the Austrian school and that kind of thing. That was actually the starting point for me, right? I think I read The Road to Serfdom pretty early. It was
It's like a gateway book.
Yeah, it is a gateway book. 8th grade, 9th grade, something like that. And from there, I was like, I want to do something with economics, finance, something. Wasn't really sure what. Kind of got to college and looked at sort of what my econ TAs were doing, and I was like, that doesn't look like fun to me. So from there, started poking around in terms of actual applications of economics and that kind of thing, and ended up interning at a couple of hedge funds. I studied math at the University of Maryland, College Park. So I would take the subway in, do my hedge fund thing, come back and try not to fail out of the math major. Just kind of rinse, repeat on that for a few years. Ended up, sort of cold emailing, hustling my way into an internship at JP Morgan, for a summer in their sales and trading. And then from there was able to, kind of parlay that into a full-time offer at one of the bigger hedge funds out there, multi-strat fund called Millennium. And then, really from there, I did that until 2018. And then, the entrepreneurial itch kind of got to me, right? And so that kind of brings us to where we are today, which is, I own some real estate, do some credit investing, do some lending, right? Do some angel investing. Just kind of, I would say today, very, very agnostic, but, really enjoy risk taking, really enjoy looking at opportunities, through different sorts of frameworks. And, definitely, I would say if you had told me at any step of the thing, where the ultimate thing was going, right, I would have probably been like, whoa, what the hell? That doesn't make a lot of sense. But, getting here, there's a lot of things I picked up along the way. And, I think it's really easy when you're in undergrad or even when you just graduated to sort of sit down and say, hey, this is my trajectory is going to be kind of this linear thing. It's going to start here and it's going to go. But it never works like that. And it's not only because there's exogenous stuff outside of your control. It's also the case when you get to T plus 10 or whatever, you're different. And the way you see stuff is different. Right. So, I think I'm pleased. It's where I'm at. It's fun. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I definitely can relate in my own career, and also just like I feel like all the people with the most interesting career stories always have that very non-linear path when you look back. And sometimes when you're looking back, sometimes it feels like maybe it was more intentional than what it actually was. It's like, I definitely meant to turn right back there in the fork in the road. So I wanna drill into some of those earlier experiences, in particular, like your path into Wall Street and how you maneuvered your way into what is, kind of like an old boys club. Like, who do you know? What prestigious university did you come from? Like, how did you go get your foot in the door in like a super cutthroat, highly competitive arena?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's something that, and I think this is one of the things that I've sort of taken away from my career broadly, right? You do shit and you don't necessarily know while you're just kind of trying to solve, how do I get from here to here? And you're doing the shit, and then you find out later, sometimes years later, like, wow, that was actually a pretty portable thing there, right?
Yep.
Which is, and so in my case, right, with respect to kind of getting onto Wall Street, right, it was having a willingness to basically, law of large numbers stuff, send a lot of cold emails, take a lot of calls, hop on a $20, megabus up to New York City, meet with some guys who were, alum of University of Maryland and shoot the shit with them and convince them that I was a cool guy and that they should, even though it was unorthodox, right, they should push HR to get me an interview, right? So, that was a lot of it, was honestly just kind of biting the bullet and being like, I probably wasn't the most like out there guy in high school or anything, or the most aggressive guy with respect to something like that, but recognizing that being that guy and pushing hard and not giving a shit if I failed because I was sending another 50 emails the next day or whatever, right? That kind of thing, being okay with rejection, like getting past that initial gag reflex around rejection, and just being willing to play the numbers and that kind of thing. I think that was probably the biggest. That got me my first internship.
Yep.
That got me my first interview with a Wall Street bank. It even after I had those building blocks, that got me all of the interviews for full-time roles at mega funds. So I think just broadly being really fucking aggressive and not giving a shit if people reject you. Taking feedback that's constructive and helpful. Yes, that's super fucking important, but also recognizing when feedback doesn't come from a good faith place, or maybe it's not applicable for some reason, right? I think putting those together and just going out into the arena and taking a lot of cuts. I mean, that was ultimately number one, an approach that even when I sort of had something to draw on in the way of experience, right? Network, that was still super fucking valuable. But then also, so much learning comes out of that, right? One of the first cold email sort of blasts I did, I didn't realize that fonts were going to show up differently in Outlook than they do in Gmail, right? So one of the first, literally within 5 minutes of me hitting send, some dude's like, bro, your fonts are fucked up. Do you know that? I was like, oh, but the dude took my call, right? And he was really cool about it. He was like, just get your fonts fucking straight. Like, I'm not even trying to knock you or anything. Like, other people are going to notice your fonts are wrong and they're going to hit delete. And I was like, thanks, man. Like, that's helpful, right?
Take the tip.
So, yeah. So take a lot of cuts. Take a lot of cuts. I mean, I think you're either going to learn something or you're going to hit something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think sometimes people overlook that, like going, getting in the batter's box, taking all those early cuts. Like sometimes if it doesn't immediately result in the kind of outcome you're after, like that's a failed experience. But you clearly picked up along the way, even before you had success. Like you clearly learned along the way by trusting the process. So that very first internship, so playing the cold email game, did you have a template that led you to want to do that, or what gave you the idea to be like, okay, I'm gonna do this until it works, and not only the idea but the resolve to see it through?
Yeah, no, so it's a great question. It's funny because you make a great point earlier, right? Which is that early failures or successes, right? Let's say there's a lot of reps, right? There's a lot of draws from the distribution, something like this. And if you strike out on your first 20, 40, 50, whatever, right? You're going to say, oh, this doesn't work, right? And so I think that I got pretty lucky from the perspective of I probably only sent 20 odd emails on that first go round, and I got 2 interviews out of that. So the hit rate was outrageously high. It was way too high. It had no business being that high. And I think that it was, I've always been, it's kind of a dumb thing to be good at, but I've always been pretty good at writing emails. I've always been pretty good at writing emails. So I think on the one hand, people are like, all right, this guy can format a resume. He can write an email. He's got some shit going for him. And then from there, the interviews were pretty light from a technical perspective. And especially, and this is something, I don't know how prevalent this is outside of finance, right? But most finance interview processes, even you're pretty laid back. Hey, I'm shooting somebody a cold email for an internship, 20 hours a week during the academic year, right? Even something like that will generally have a pretty technical component, right? There's going to be a qualitative component. There's going to be a technical component. I've always found that if you really perform well in the qualitative piece, right, they're going to be like, all right, this guy, he's like an 8 out of 10 guy on the quantitative piece, but we really like him. He's a good dude.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've always found you can kind of balance that out. But, the couple that I have, they were pretty light on the technical. I think one of them had a programming question, which I sort of stumbled through. And, they were like, the main thing we need out of somebody who's doing this role, they got to know VBA because they got to fix our risk models because our risk models are all up. And I was like, I'm your man. I know VBA. And I was like, please do not have a VBA. Keep doing the pseudocode. Please do not have a VBA specific syntax question. And they didn't. So then I got back to my dorm. They shoot me an email. They're like, we want you to start tomorrow. And I was like, oh, I better learn VBA. And so, that was kind of
back to the drawing board real quick.
That was, that was, I mean, so, I was lucky they didn't call me on that. Right. But one of the things I found in the course of interviewing that is huge, is contrary to that early, kind of lucky break. You should always under promise so that you can over deliver. Right. So if somebody looks at your resume and they go, oh, this dude's done X, Y, and Z in Python. Right. You should be like a fucking Python genius when they come at you in the interview. Right. Yep. Because if you go the other way and they're like, that disconnect is never good. When you go the other way, people are like, oh, like this guy's fucking legit. Right. So, got a little lucky on that, but, the under promise over deliver is definitely kind of the tried and true sort of strategy in an interview.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's definitely great advice. I tell people this all the time, especially like, I'll see like college grads coming out and they're like, I have all these things on my resume. And it's like, well, what have you actually done? Well, I did a bunch of assignments. And so I listed this XYZ skill on a resume, but I couldn't replicate, that skill in the real world. So it's like, don't list that stuff then. You're not actually good at that. You don't have an experience to back it up.
One of the wildest things, for me as somebody who was studying, I was finance and math. And at a point I ditched finance, I was graduating early for my full-time job. So I had to drop something and it was that I stuck with math. But, one of the wild things about even the finance program is just how light it was with respect to how to do shit in Excel, how to do shit in PowerPoint. I mean, if you're going into finance and you haven't done, now listen, I mean, it's different if your dad is like CEO of Deutsche or something, but like, if you're some guy like me trying to get this job, like, and you can't do shit in Excel, I mean, you're going to have a hard time. I mean, banking, PowerPoint and Excel, right? Trading, no PowerPoint really, but like Excel definitely. And then, at this stage of the game, you should probably know how to program, right? And it doesn't have to be in something crazy. It can be Python. It can even be VBA on a lot of desks, right? It doesn't have to be some heavy duty C++, compiled language. It can definitely be a scripting language. There's nothing wrong with that. But, I mean, if you don't have the right dad, you better be good at that because they're going to expect you to be good at something, right? Yeah. So I think that's something that I was really surprised about, just how the B school broadly was really, really light on real world, skills like how to use Excel and not use the mouse, like stuff that will save your life later, right? Just very, very little, which is why the career stuff, which is why getting the internships, right, and doing that kind of to your point about, I did it in the classroom, that's super valuable because you can talk about stuff that your interview is going to have done at some point, and they're going to be like, oh wow, this kid has actually done some shit. It wasn't a group project. This guy was working at some fund while doing school, and he had to get some shit done under some time constraint. Like that's very legit. Yeah,
that's awesome. So like following those first few internships and like going out and getting your foot in the door, like your first early career experience. At like what point did it change from like I'm trying to just get whatever I can get to I have a plan here? There's kind of like a career path or a loose plan that I'm shooting toward.
Yeah, no, this is a great question. I love this. So I think there was always some semblance of a plan. Mm-hmm. I think the thing that happened was the sort of the timing of it changed, right?
Yeah.
Because initially I was sort of like, all right, let's condition. And I think this happens. I think people do this a lot. And I think that I see it a lot when like people, like when I would ask people for advice, it would happen a lot too, which is that you are generally conditioning sort of outcomes, right? And the pace the pace at which you can accomplish things, on sort of being let's say a replacement caliber person, right? A median person. And if you're not a median person or you're less than a median person, right? Those projections are going to kind of fall short, right?
Yep.
So I had spoken to a lot of folks and, I would get coffee, get drinks with folks in New York. I guess not drinks. I wasn't 21 yet. So coffee. I get coffee with people in New York, right? And for the most part, they would give me pretty middle of the road sort of milquetoast advice about what to do. And that worked, but then there sort of came a point where I had been successful enough that it was clear that I was probably not the median person.
Yep.
And so at a point, following that advice was going to be detrimental, right? And so I think there was always a plan. I think it was the pace that changed, right? My plan was, let's get on a trading desk at one of the big Wall Street banks, and I'll do that for a couple of years. And at some point, I'll parlay that into a job on the buy side like people do. And then from there, I didn't know what was going to happen after that, but that was it, right? That was kind of the plan. And so, when I got the internship at JP Morgan my sophomore summer, all of a sudden I was like, all right, I've got an advantage here.
Yep.
I should press this advantage. And so that was sort of for me a big turning point, because I went from a world in which I had a lot of people who could teach me a lot of shit and who could give me really solid, even if pretty narrow kind of domain advice, right? I had a lot of people I could draw on from that for that kind of color, for that kind of advice. And those people kind of faded, right? Because they were like, oh, this guy's in like pretty uncharted territory. He's teed up to have the job I have now pretty fucking soon. And so like what to do next, right? And I think that was initially really disconcerting, just being like, none of these guys have the answers to this because they haven't been there.
Yep.
But I found pretty soon, and certainly, after leaving Wall Street, that's actually just a big part of the game, is realizing that the people who you looked up to, you kind of passed them at a point with respect to, on some dimensions, you've passed them, and you can't really get great color from them anymore because you've passed them, right? And so that was a weird thing for me personally, but it's been a recurring theme where, I'll, as an example, where I do a lot of distressed credit investing, I can talk to my attorneys or someone about the nuances of, all right, this particular deal or how to approach this particular foreclosure or something like that. But it's very hard to get someone to say, this is what you should do. This is what you should do with your time. This is what you should do with your capital, right? That kind of bigger picture, step back and think about, what you want to be doing in 10, 20 years. That advice is really fucking hard, and good advice on those dimensions is really fucking hard to come by. And so I think, I was sort of out there, confused and scared in the arena for a bit, but I think it was a great lesson that really, was indicative of what the future was going to look like, which is that you get to a place and it's kind of a mission accomplished moment.
Yeah.
But it's sort of because you're like, all right, well, now I got to find people who know something about the next stage of this thing.
Yep.
So yeah, great question.
Yeah, you parlayed into the perfect next question there as well, though. But like, as you're entering those next phases, whether it's, internship to first job and you have some success, or, later on in your career, you
sell side to buy side.
Yeah. You made several transitions and then later into entrepreneurship. Like so 2-part question. One, how do you realize that suddenly the people around you that you've previously relied on, like they're no longer the right people to ask? And 2, like, where do you turn for advice or for formulating a plan about what to do next?
Yeah, no, they're great questions, and it's funny because one of the perpetual challenges, and I'm sure you follow me, so you know that I've poked fun at this over the last 6 months. But one of the challenges about the whole mentor thing, right, is that even if you have someone who's a killer, who's ahead of you, in age and accomplishments and this kind of thing, right, it can still be very difficult to get quality advice out of that person because they are broadly giving advice to the median person, right? And so, and I don't consider myself to be a dick for doing this. I might be a dick for other reasons, but it's definitely the case. It's definitely the case that I do this as well, right? until someone demonstrates to me, convincingly that they're in the right tail of the distribution.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give advice to the medium person and sort of see what happens with it, right? So I mean, there were underclassmen below me who would come to me and say, "Hey man, how did you do this shit?" And I would tell them, and some of them would act on it, and some of them wouldn't, right? And so the ones who did, I was like, "All right, next level, right? This is, if you really want to push this thing, this is what you can do, right?" And so one of the persistent challenges I think about soliciting advice from people who are ahead of you is that if they don't eventually start to give advice that's sort of conditional on you being in the right hand side of the distribution, probably not such a great person to go to for advice, right?
Yeah.
And so that to me is sort of the measure of whether or not you continue to get advice from someone is, are they sort of taking into account successes and failures, probably, right? And adjusting the advice to you. And if they're not, probably not such a great person to get advice from, right? Maybe they've got a lot of domain experience, right? So maybe you bought a property in a town and you don't know a lot about zoning. You're not really in with zoning. There's probably a couple of attorneys who are, and they're maybe not some guy you'd be like, "Hey man, should I buy this deal or not?" Right? But they can tell you, if you do buy this property, right, what sorts of battles are you looking at if you're trying to make a change to it, right? So I think that's the difference. There's still a lot of people who can give decent domain experience, but when you want someone who can do the step back and bigger picture advice, I've just consistently found that to be really, really challenging. And I think the piece of advice that I would give to folks who are looking for that person, number one, don't spend a lot of time looking for that person. Like if you run into that person, that's fucking great. Like if you run into that person, that's awesome. But don't be, I've had some joke tweets about standing on a corner in Midtown with a sign, right? I mean, don't do that. Like just do the shit. There's a lot of value in just doing the shit. You're going to learn a lot by just doing the shit. And, the people who give you advice, sometimes they can save you some pain in that learning process. Sometimes they can't. But I think that if you want to find somebody, I would spend less time focusing on domain and more time just focusing on results outright, right?
Yeah.
Someone has been fucking successful in something. There's probably a lot about what that person did that is pretty transferable and pretty transferable and pretty portable to your domain, whatever that is, right? And so I think that's the biggest advice. Just always be on the lookout. There are people who killed it in a million different things, and don't toss somebody for that reason, right? Somebody who's taking some risk and accomplished something, they can probably teach you something about something that's applicable to what you're trying to do it in, right? So that's probably the biggest.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to it's a great way to think about it. And I love the point that you make about like most people are watering down their advice for the median versus like I'm giving you advice as someone who is in the upper echelon of like the former.
Knowing you, here's the advice. You're in this decile, here's the advice. And so it used to kill me because I would be like, yeah, I'm getting drinks with this guy and he's totally doing the shit I want to do. And he'd be like, all right, well, the first thing you got to do is you got to format your resume. Right. And I'm like, bro, come on, man. I'm at this drinks with you. Obviously I did my resume, right, man? Come on. Yeah. So it can be discouraging. And, I sort of came to this formulation after just seeing it a lot. I would be like, why is this guy telling me this? Like, he's acting like I'm some dude off the street, but it's actually, most people just, that's kind of how they give advice. Right. So.
Yeah. And it kind of goes back to like the other point. It was like, if you're the person who's like, oh, you're so hungry for a mentor that you forget to actually do the work, or you're not actually out there hustling, like you're probably not going to get a whole lot more value out of having the mentor. Like just go do the work, and like, that's kind of a more important precondition than having a mentor, is like that you're actually out there hustling and doing the work. So,
and a lot of, I think the people who you look up to, who I look up to, right, who could potentially be mentors, they're going to want to see something, right? Yeah. They're going to want to see, hey, the guy, there's one guy I have, he's an attorney of mine, who's probably the closest thing that I've ever had to a mentor, if you will. And the way I met him was by doing it. It was not by me, posting something on Craigslist singles or something, be like, hey, I'm some kid, I want a mentor. Like nah, if you do, you're going to find people who are going to be like, that guy's doing some cool shit. It's got some overlap with mine. I'm going to, and the whole mentor. I mean, I think that if he heard me call him that, he would be like, what the, like, definitely not your mentor.
Chill.
Like,
Chill,
I'm your
bro.
attorney. Like, yeah, like I'm your attorney and, we hang out, but like, I don't know, that mentor thing, that sounds kind of weird.
I'm going to have to
Right.
bill you more for that.
Bumping my hourly now that I know a mentor. Yeah.
Yeah. So at what point in your career did you feel like you were starting to see this shift and like, I want to continue down this track versus I've got this entrepreneurial itch, I got to go do my own thing?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So the short answer is that my desk got fired.
Oh.
And the long, so I guess, this is for the Wall Street fans out there who appreciate this, but Millennium, so Millennium is a big multi-strategy fund, right? I think they're probably like $40 billion today. And when I was there, there were a load of desks and everyone's doing their own thing, right? So I'm sitting across from dudes who are trading financials. We're a commodities desk, right? And so everyone's just doing their own thing, super diversified. That's the model, right? And so if anybody draws down too much, they've got really tight risk limits and really tight drawdown limits, right? So I guess it was 2018. We had sort of a not incredible 2017, and we had started getting it back in 18. And then, some of the Trump tariff things happened, and that we got in some trouble on that. And so we went back to being kind of flat on the year. And that was sort of it. And so, then I had this non-compete I was waiting out. So I was interviewing around, with other funds in Greenwich, and I kind of got to a point where I was like, all right, well, I got some stuff on the table, but my non-compete's not up yet. I wonder what it'd be like if I just did this real estate thing.
Yeah.
Because I probably owned less than 20 units at the time. I mean, it wasn't a lot. But I had done a few things. I'd bought STR in Savannah, Georgia, and learned some great lessons about third-party management there.
I'm sure.
I'd made a couple of acquisitions in Connecticut, totally different strategy, focused on workforce housing, high yield stuff, a lot of Section 8, still have a lot of Section 8 today. And, I think my partner and I had very recently won at a foreclosure sale, a duplex for like 20 grand, right? Hoarder house, complete. I mean, just the nastiest. And so here I am, 1 week I'm sitting on a trading desk in Greenwich with my boat shoes up on the desk. And the next week I've got my, my steel toe boots on and I'm trashing out this fucking hoarder house. Right. And people who know, it's funny because people who really, really know me, they were like, bro, turn down those hedge fund offers, do this real estate shit. It's fucking wild. And it looks nothing like the hedge fund shit, but it's totally you. Yeah. Right. And I was like, I don't know, man. I kind of like the hedge fund guy thing. I kind of feel like it's my thing. But, the more that I did it, and I had this great kind of 90-day non-compete window during which I could just sort of do it.
Yeah.
And the more I did it, I was like, you know what? This is definitely more convex than the hedge fund thing in the near term. And it was kind of hard for me not to say it's probably more convex in the long term too, because it's just going to compound.
Yeah.
Right. So that was kind of the point for me where I was like, all right, called up the guys who made me offers, said, thanks, but no thanks. And they were like, you're going to another fund? Where are you going? And I was like, not really. So that was the turning point, right? It was when I looked at sort of what I perceived to be the paths of it. And the hedge fund thing was, steep, but linear. And this seemed to be a lot more convex and a lot more open-ended. And it was sort of, it was weird for me because I spent all of undergrad and a good piece of, the few years out of undergrad, very myopically just marching down this path.
Yep.
But I think that I saw that there were a lot of inefficiencies in private markets, and as a public markets guy, that was really compelling to me. And then it was just also just the convexity for me personally. It seemed to be something that had, a lot of upside.
Yeah, that's awesome. So did you go into like personal investing for a while? What was that stint like before launching the private money lending?
Yeah, so we did a lot of deals, and guys I went to college with threw down on some of the stuff. And, we've done well on it. Today, I really only buy real estate, me personally.
Yeah.
I think that there are some things about real estate, in particular workforce and C-class housing, that you just feel really dumb explaining it to people. and so, increasingly, really just do the real estate side with my capital.
Yeah.
But, on the credit side, I think there are a lot of things. So I got into credit investing because of real estate investing, right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of a regular in Connecticut at all flavors of foreclosure sale, tax deed sale, tax lien sale, judicial foreclosure sale. And so there was a point where there was an attorney who, was hired by a lender to foreclose on a property. She just came across my name somehow, gave me a call and said, "Hey, how would you like to buy this loan?" And I said, "All right, I guess I'm a credit investor now. Let's try this." And so, I think I paid 50 cents on the dollar for the loan. It was really cheap. And, it ended up being a not a straightforward deal, but a pretty profitable one. And so from there, I just started reaching out to other local lenders and saying, "Hey, do you have any commercial paper that you'd like to unload that, you're not trying to be?" Because all of these lenders, ultimately, they don't want to be on the chain of title. They don't want to own real estate. They don't want to have to figure out third-party management for it. That's not their business. Their business is, we borrow from the Fed at nothing and we lend to somebody else at more than nothing. We make that spread. That's our business, right? So for them, they're like, "All right, we got a guy coming in who is going to pay us, probably not par, but a decent price. And we're going to be done with this thing in 30 days, as opposed to in Connecticut, a process that can take 2 years, a judicial foreclosure process, right?" So that was sort of the first foray into credit investing. And it was done very much with an eye towards, how do I get real estate with an interesting basis?
Yep.
And then, the pandemic hit and that market really disappeared, that secondary market for commercial loans. A lot of banks got a lot of money from the CARES Act and this kind of thing, and they didn't really have to mark their books for a while. And a lot of them wanted to see who the winners and losers would be from that crisis before deciding what they would sell. Right. And so in the middle of that, we sort of pivoted and said, "All right, that market's dried up. What would happen if we just started making our own loans?"
Yep.
And, initially we focused pretty heavily on sort of special situations, right? Some guy or gal inherits a property, don't really know what to do with it, but they've got bills and they're trying to pay those. Things on free and clear. They want a 50 LTV loan. It's going to close in, a couple weeks. And so we did that kind of special sits thing for a bit. But that flow is also very fickle, right? You're basically looking for borrowers who are sort of, I say, smart enough, but dumb enough, right? Smart enough to be able to get the loan and know that they need the loan, but kind of dumb enough that they can't go to a conventional lender. Yeah. Right. And then, we sort of pivoted into basically guys that look like me, don't have a W-2, don't really have a banking relationship, right? Tax returns are funky because their AGI is low because they own a bunch of real estate. Yeah. Right. And just need consistent, reliable debt capital that's going to be there when they call on it, because they're finding off market stuff that needs to close quick. Right. Yep. Or they're buying stuff out of a foreclosure out of a foreclosure sale process that needs to close quickly. So that was sort of the path to origination. Right. And again, it's a very, similar to points that we touched on earlier, which is that, I'd never planned to get into debt investing. I never planned to be a mortgage originator. I never planned to, but when you get in the arena, you spot opportunities and you say, "Hey," for me, it was the opportunity of, I borrowed from basically every hard money lender there is, and none of them ever closed in less than 60 days. And it always killed me because I need to know this is going to close. This is my entire business. I don't have a W-2 job. I don't have some can fall back on. I need this deal to happen. And so when you guys tell me it's going to happen in 30 and it doesn't happen for 60, that puts my whole operation, is in jeopardy. And I need, you need debt capital that's reliable in real estate. And a lot of people will pay a premium for it, right? I get people all the time who come to me and say, "Hey, Kyle, I got this, I got a bank that's willing to do this at whatever rate." And I say, "Hey, listen, that's great. If that's real, you should take that. But if that's not real, you got my number." And, a lot of them end up coming back because you can look at the sticker price, but it's another thing to close the fucking loan.
Yeah.
right? And I think that's sort of the main thing. And so, now we're in the mode of, scaling that business. That business is already bigger than real estate in terms of revenue, which is another awesome aspect of it, right? I mean, debt really does scale quite well relative to equity, in real estate anyways. And so, that business is ramping. And so, we're just trying to take this borrower centric, ethos and really just improve the experience for those guys, because they've got a business to run. And it doesn't help when, we know nothing about what they're doing and we're trying to make this loan, which is, which is the approach a lot of these guys have. You got some kid who just graduated, UT or something, doesn't know anything about real estate. He's studied psychology or some shit. And this is the guy. This is the guy who's going to decide if you live or die, right? So, I mean, I think that's we're taking a different approach, and you can see it by the fact that I myself am coming from the equity side.
Yeah,
I've been through a lot of the shit that a lot of the people have had to deal with.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome to hear just the wild turn of events at different points in your career. If you had to look back where you're at now and sort of what the day-to-day life looks like now versus various points in the past, like how would you rate your level of overall enjoyment and like personal satisfaction versus like different points in your career?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that the reason I started investing in real estate to begin with was because I cracked open the compliance handbook and I said, what am I allowed to do without a lot of bullshit, right? Because if I want to trade, number one, I can't trade commodities. And number two, if I want to trade any public anything, there's at least, a week-long process with compliance where they're going to ask me questions about why and all this shit. And so I think that being able to do whatever the I want with not only my capital, but also my time is incredibly valuable. And I get a lot of enjoyment. I actually get a lot of enjoyment just out of that. Right. Yeah. So I think there are people who play for, and it's really interesting to talk with different people and who've had levels of success in different things and say, why do you play the game? Like, what is it for you? Right. Like, is there some number you're trying to get to? Is there some monthly number? Is there some net worth number? I'm always super interested to find out what makes people do the shit that they do. And for me, there's no numbers. Like, I just love playing games. And so I'm in a position now where like I can play basically any game I want. Like the first time I wrote an angel check, I hopped on the phone with my buddy who found it and a couple other guys I went to college with. After 30 minutes, we were like, yeah, like this could be zero, but it could be a lot more than zero. Like that's kind of interesting. And that was it. Right. So, I mean, I think just having that degree of freedom with my time and with my capital to be able to do wild shit like that puts the enjoyment, on just a totally different level relative to, okay, I like following markets. I like reading research. I like taking risks. But when you have the time and the capital and you can really, really do whatever the fuck you want with it, there's no mandate, there's no rules. That to me is extremely satisfying. And it's something that it's just a hard thing. It's just a hard thing to get an institutional seat. Yep. Right. And so I think that to me is what I get the most satisfaction of. Just that total, I can be very, very agnostic. I can go as deep or as wide or as however I want to slice and dice this thing. I can do it. And it's funny because it really does come out in the things I've gotten involved in, because these are things, if I was in an institutional seat, they'd be some pie in the sky, some wild. No one would ever let you do that. How would compliance okay that? How would risk okay that? Right. But because it is, my time, my capital, it's really, really, it's fun to sit around and be like, what should we do with this? Yeah. That liberty is a lot of fun.
I think you just like hit the nail on the head about what this show is all about as well. Like having that agency and the access to opportunities because of the arena you've put yourself in. So, tons of great points and nuggets and throughout this discussion so far. I want to bring it home with sort of one overarching question. So you're talking to a young, early 20-something young adult who wants to break into finance or real estate, or just not really sure about how to go about breaking into an arena that they want to. Like what's some of the advice you would give them based off like what you've learned, taking many different twists and turns in your own career?
I think the biggest piece, I think there's a couple of things that, I wouldn't say that they're not unique to me. And I think that's the beauty of them, right? There are things that you can do that are not innate that will benefit you no matter what you do.
Yeah.
And I think one of those things is just like an overarching, an agnosticism of sorts, which would just tell you to be willing to explore, right?
Yeah.
You might have some preconception about what investment banking is, about what consulting is, about what any career track is, but you definitely should update that hypothesis if you get new information about how much you enjoy it, about
Absolutely.
how good you are at it, about, anything, right? You should always be willing to update your hypothesis in light of new information. And you should always be looking for new information, because it could be the case that the thing that you thought you should do doesn't make any sense in light of the new information. And if you don't act on it, you're going to be fucking pissed. You're going to be in some job that, maybe it pays well or whatever, but maybe it's not the one that you should have. Right. Yep. So I think an overarching, just total agnosticism and a willingness to update hypotheses in light of new information is huge. And I think the other one is just like maybe there's a nicer way of saying it, but like you have to be aggressive, right? You cannot take no. And I think this is the case in situations that are adversarial. It's the case in situations that are, more convivial. I think broadly being aggressive, no one who is actually going to be helpful on your journey is going to look at you being hungry and aggressive and say, oh, that guy, he's too hungry and too aggressive, right? Yeah. I've gotten into rooms where people are like, you are an aggressive motherfucker. We like that, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the guy, the guy or the gal who's not going to take your call, they're not going to take your call anyway. They're not going to be helpful anyways, right? Yeah. So I think being comfortable with rejection and recognizing that is part of the process and part of being aggressive, which is ultimately what's going to, lead to success, all those reps, and being okay with that. I think that's another thing that, again, can totally be learned. It's not innate. You literally just have to go out there and be like, I don't give a shit. I'm going to succeed. It doesn't fucking matter. These are all just draws out of the distribution. And the more draws I can make out of the distribution, the more likely it is that this one is, that one of them is going to be the one, right? So I think that's the other thing. It's just you have to hit it. You have to hit it hard.
I love it. Tons of great advice there, man. Great points to end on. Great. I love that. Those aren't generic pieces of advice. I don't get points like that very often. So thanks for those last two nuggets there. And thanks for joining us.
I'm not special. I think that's important. I might be decent at tweeting. Maybe that's innate, but broadly speaking, not special. Anyone can hit the shit hard and have an open mind about it, right? So.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of Self-Directed. For the listeners out there on your favorite podcast platform, hit subscribe, drop us a comment if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll be back again soon.
Thanks, Mitchell.
Yeah, you bet.